That German Shepherd freezes with two puppies. A man's decision to open the door will surprise you. It was one of those nights when winter shows its worst face. The temperature dropped below 10 degrees C, and the icy and sharp wind blew with such force that it seemed like it wanted to tear the trees from their roots. The sky was completely clouded, and the snow hadn't stopped falling since dawn. The entire village was in silence, hidden behind closed doors and turned-on heaters. In a solitary cabin on the edge of the forest lived Tom, an older man who had chosen isolation after a personal tragedy. That night, like many others, Tom sought comfort in routine. He lit the wood stove, prepared hot coffee, and sat in his armchair with an old book in his hands. But just when he was beginning to find a bit of peace in the warmth of the house, a strange sound interrupted the silence, a weak but persistent scratching coming from the back door. At first he thought it was some branch hitting from the wind or maybe a raccoon seeking shelter, but the sound was rhythmic, as if something or someone was trying to get attention. Intrigued and somewhat irritated, he got up cautiously, took a flashlight from the shelf and headed toward the door. As he approached, his instinct told him that something was wrong. He turned the handle slowly and opening the door, the scene he found left him speechless. Opening the door, Tom immediately felt a blast of icy air that went through him to the bone. But what really paralyzed him wasn't the cold, but the scene before him. There, on the threshold of his cabin, was a German Shepherd female, soaked and covered with snow, with fur tangled by ice. She was shaking in an uncontrollable way, and in her eyes was a mixture of fear, pain, and pleading that transcended all language. But what moved him most was noticing that she wasn't alone. Huddled against her body, almost buried under her belly for protection from the cold, were two tiny puppies. They were so small they could barely stay on their feet, and their bodies were also shaking. Their breaths were short and weak. Tom, unable to move for a moment, stood and looked at the scene with disbelief. He had never seen something so defenseless and desperate. The mother didn't bark, didn't growl, or even move when they stood face to face. She simply maintained her gaze on him, as if she understood that this moment would decide the fate of her young. The female's hind paws looked stiff, as if she had been standing for hours without moving, protecting her puppies from the snow. Around her, the ground was covered with frozen tracks and ice patches, proof that they had been there for a long time. It was obvious that the female had used the last strength she had left to reach those doors, and now she simply couldn't do more. Tom felt a tightening in his throat. Before him wasn't just an animal, but a mother clinging to life for her children, betting everything on this stranger opening not only the doors of his house, but also of his heart. Tom stood paralyzed in the entrance with his hand still on the handle, while the icy wind entered through the ajar door. The image of the German Shepherd female and her two small puppies shivering on the threshold hit him with greater force than the cold itself. The mother didn't even try to enter, didn't show signs of aggression or uneasiness, as any other animal in a state of defenselessness would do. She simply looked at him with eyes full of exhaustion, mute pleading, faith in the stranger who had emerged from that warm cabin. The puppies clung to her body, too young to understand the gravity of the situation, but their instinct kept them near the source of warmth and protection that their mother represented. In that moment, Tom felt pressure in his chest, an old and familiar feeling that for years he had tried to ignore: empathy. Since the death of his wife and son in that accident, which left him alone in the world, Tom had hardened his heart. He stopped answering phones, broke ties with friends, sold everything that reminded him of the life that no longer existed. He lived in that cabin, not from love of nature, but from a desire to disappear from the noise of the world. He didn't consider himself a cruel man, but a wounded and deeply tired one from the burden of pain. That's why when he saw that mother fighting the cold, sacrificing herself for her young, something in him stirred. It was impossible not to see in her a reflection of the unconditional love he himself had witnessed in his wife toward their son, a devotion so pure that it knows no limits, even when the body no longer can endure. But his mind resisted. What if I let them in and they die tonight? What if they get sick? What if I get attached and lose them? He asked himself, because it wasn't just about opening the door. It was accepting the risk of feeling again, caring again, opening a small crack in the armor he had built around his heart. And that was terrifying, because the pain of loss was so deep that any possibility of experiencing it again seemed unbearable to him. However, that same internal struggle made him realize how much he had changed. Years ago, he might not have even bothered to open the door. Now he stood there, considering the possibility of saving 3 completely unknown lives. The scene before him wasn't just a request for help. It was a test, a sign perhaps, that life still had paths to travel if he dared to take a step. The mother didn't plead with gestures or moans, only with her presence, her quiet patience, and the way she still protected her puppies even at death's door. That kind of courage couldn't be ignored. Tom felt a tear sliding down his cheek, one of the few he had shed since his tragedy. It was in that moment, amid doubts, fear, and compassion, that he began to make the decision. One that would change not only the fate of those animals, but also the direction of his own life. Tom remained a few more seconds, observing that scene frozen in time, as if the whole world held its breath, waiting for his decision. Snow continued to fall mercilessly, accumulating around the mother's paws and the tiny bodies of the puppies. The trembling of all 3 intensified, and the steam emerging from their muzzles became weaker and weaker. That's when Tom, with a deep sigh that seemed to tear a stone from the bottom of his soul, pushed the door completely inward and stepped back. He didn't say a word, didn't extend his hand, just opened the passage, offering them something more than shelter, a chance. The mother remained motionless for a moment, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. Her eyes met Tom's eyes once more, and in that silent crossing there was understanding, a kind of wordless pact. Slowly, with visible effort, the female gathered strength to get up. Swaying at first, she pushed one of the puppies with her muzzle, then the other, leading them to the warm interior. The little ones dragged themselves clumsily, almost without energy, but moved forward, pushed by the instinct to follow their mother and the promise of warmth behind those doors. Tom backed away slowly, making room, watching as they crossed the threshold step by step until all 3 were inside. The mother barely managed to walk a few meters in the house before collapsing on the wooden floor, exhausted, with the puppies huddling against her body once more. Steam from the interior warmth began to melt the ice attached to their paws and fur. Within minutes, water was accumulating in small puddles under them, but Tom wasn't worried about the mess. His gaze was fixed on the 3 trembling bodies, alive, defenseless, but safe for now. Without thinking too much, he ran to the hallway closet, pulled out old towels and a thick blanket he kept for emergencies. He returned quickly, kneeling beside the animals with a mixture of clumsiness and tenderness he hadn't felt in years. Carefully, he dried the mother's fur, removing pieces of ice embedded in her coat. Then he wrapped each puppy in a towel, gently rubbing them to reactivate circulation. Contact with those so small and fragile bodies shook him. He felt that each movement awakened a part of him that had been sleeping for a very long time. The silence of the house filled with new sounds. Light moans from the puppies, weak panting from the mother, crackling from the stove that still burned in the background. It was as if life had returned with them. Tom stayed there on the floor beside the family he had saved, not yet knowing what would come next, but deep down already feeling that something irreversible had begun to change in him. What he had done wasn't just opening doors on a freezing night. He had opened the path back to humanity, which he had buried in pain, and without knowing it, he had just begun the most unexpected chapter of his life. The cabin, which for years had been a place of shadows and bitter memories, began to fill with something new: movement, warmth, life. After drying the female and her puppies, Tom improvised a small bed in the corner near the stove with blankets and pillows. The mother, though exhausted, lay down with quiet dignity, allowing her young to cling to her teats in search of food. Tom observed every detail with attention, as if trying to understand how so much devotion was possible in a being that seemed on the verge of collapse. He got up and prepared a bit of warm water. He poured it into a metal bowl and carefully brought it closer. The female lifted her head with difficulty, smelled the bowl, and drank eagerly. It was the first clear sign that life still remained in her, and Tom felt relief so deep he almost didn't recognize it. With minutes, the temperature of the puppies' bodies began to stabilize. They no longer shook with such violence, and their moans were more constant and less pitiful. Tom wasn't a veterinarian, but something inside him told him they were succeeding. He sat in a nearby chair, not taking his eyes off them. Hours passed, and he wasn't aware of time. Outside, the blizzard continued, even more isolating the cabin from the rest of the world. But for the first time in a long time, Tom didn't mind being isolated. He didn't feel alone. Each breath of those animals reminded him that he had made the right decision. At midnight, he offered them some boiled chicken he had stored in the refrigerator. He cut small pieces and placed them on another plate. The female ate slowly, not moving away from her children. Tom noticed she had a slight wound on her paw, perhaps a cut from ice, and felt an impulse to help her. He searched in the first aid kit for a bit of disinfectant and bandages. Though she trembled when he approached, she didn't resist. He cleaned the wound gently, making sure he wasn't causing her greater pain. That night, Tom didn't sleep. He stayed on the floor beside them, wrapped in a blanket, with the stove gently crackling in the background. He had spent years not allowing anyone, neither people nor animals, to get so close, but now in that small scene of survival, he felt a connection he hadn't experienced in a long time. He watched the mother sleeping surrounded by her puppies and thought that life in an unexpected way still had something to offer him. He didn't know what the future would bring, but that night he understood that opening the door had not only saved 3 lives, it had also lit a spark in his soul, a hope he believed had been extinguished forever. Dawn came slowly, painting the fogged window of the cabin with orange tones. Tom, with tired eyes and numb back, slowly rose from the floor. He had spent the entire night watching, carefully observing every movement of the female and her puppies, as if each moment was crucial. But in the light of the new day, the scene before him was different. The puppies were breathing more calmly. One even made a quiet moan during sleep. The mother observed them with her tired eyes, but now with a calm, protective posture, as if she knew she no longer had to fight alone. Tom turned on the coffee maker and stayed by the window, while the aroma of coffee filled the atmosphere. Outside, the blizzard was beginning to subside, and the white landscape seemed more peaceful, almost cozy. But in him another storm had awakened. Each glance he cast at that small family brought him memories, fleeting images of his wife laughing in the kitchen, his little son running through the field after a ball, afternoons spent by the fire telling stories. He also remembered the dog they had, Max, a cheerful Labrador who slept at the foot of the bed and barked every time the child cried. He had buried all of this in the depths of his soul, in a corner he had sworn never to open again. But now echoes of that past returned with force, and not as a wound, but as a promise that still pulsed in some corner of his existence. He returned to the dogs. One of the puppies opened its eyes for the first time. It was a brief moment, almost unnoticeable, but full of meaning. Tom held it gently in his hands, and feeling that tiny warmth between his fingers, something in him gently broke, like old armor yielding to a greater force. His tears fell without sound, quiet, but liberating. It wasn't just compassion he felt. It was a mixture of pain, love, memory, and rebirth. He had spent so much time in isolation, convincing himself that he didn't deserve more feeling, more bonds, more life. And yet here he was, holding a fragile and new creature that didn't ask for explanations or conditions. It only needed warmth and care. That moment, seemingly simple, marked an invisible but deep turn. Tom understood that what had begun as an act of compassion toward 3 abandoned creatures was becoming a way to heal his own story. He couldn't change the past or bring back what he had lost, but he could rebuild from this point in his own way. Those animals offered him a second chance, not with words but with their quiet presence, their need, and that pure trust that only the most innocent beings can give. For the first time in years, Tom wasn't just breathing, he was beginning to live again. The following days passed in a mixture of constant care, small victories, and slow reconstruction of bonds that seemed impossible. Tom, who until recently had shut himself in a world of loneliness and silence, began to wake up to a routine full of responsibility and tenderness. The German Shepherd mother, whom he decided to name Luna because of the gentle and protective glow of her eyes, slowly regenerated. Her movements became more confident and her gaze more alert, as if she understood that now she was safe and could trust this man who had opened his door on the coldest night. The puppies, who now clumsily ran around the cabin, brought joy to that space that had previously seemed empty and gloomy. Tom devoted himself to them with patience and dedication he didn't know he possessed. He prepared their food, cleaned their place, and watched for every sign of health or illness. Each time one of the puppies took a confident step or barked for the first time, a spark of hope ignited in his chest. As weeks passed, the presence of Luna and her puppies began to transform the cabin and Tom's life into something new and vibrant with life. The man who had feared to reconnect with other living beings began to slowly open his heart. He even left isolation to take Luna and her puppies to the veterinarian, facing his fear of the outside world and people. Each visit was a small triumph, a signal that he was ready to change. He wasn't just saving those animals, but also himself. Amid all this, Tom discovered that life can give second chances when we least expect them. The snow, which had previously seemed like a cold and threatening wall, now became a symbol of transformation. The decision to open those doors not only saved the mother and her young, but also allowed Tom to rediscover hope, love, and the possibility of a different future. The story of that night became the starting point for a path that would lead him to rebuild his life step by step, with the faithful company of Luna and her puppies, reminding him that it's never too late to start over. With the passage of months, and then years, the story of Tom, Luna, and her puppies stopped being just a personal memory to become true inspiration in the local community and on social media. That cold and quiet night when Tom decided to open the door of his cabin not only saved 3 animal lives, but also triggered a deep and lasting transformation in a man who for a long time had been locked in his own pain and isolation. The news began to spread thanks to a neighbor who, learning about the rescue, told the story to others, who then shared it, and so slowly it reached the ears of many people. The story touched the hearts of thousands who saw in Tom a tangible example of how a simple act of courage and compassion can change the course of life, not only of animals, but also human. Tom, who had lived years in solitude, facing the weight of personal tragedy that seemed insurmountable, discovered in Luna and her puppies a reason to reconnect with the world. The energy that these animals injected into his life pushed him to break down the barriers he had built around his heart. With each passing day, his house transformed from a quiet and gloomy place into a space full of gentle laughter, playful barking, and small, clumsy steps. The daily routine of caring for the dog family restored the discipline and joy he had lost. Beyond feeding and basic care, Tom began to understand the weight of love and unconditional feeling, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. His commitment to Luna and the puppies led him to become involved in social activities related to animal protection. Tom began collaborating with local shelters, participated in adoption campaigns, and even reached the point of organizing charity events for abandoned dogs. This not only improved the quality of life for many animals, but also allowed him to rebuild his own interpersonal relationships. He began to reconnect with old friends and family, who with amazement and joy saw the metamorphosis that had occurred in him. His story became tangible proof that it's never too late for healing, opening oneself to love, and giving second chances. Furthermore, Tom became an active advocate for animal welfare, using his experience to educate others about the importance of empathy and responsibility toward the most defenseless beings. His message transcended the boundaries of his small village and reached various digital platforms, where many people found in his testimony a light in dark moments. For their part, Luna and her puppies grew into strong and healthy animals, always accompanying Tom as living symbols of hope and resilience. Looking back, Tom understood that that seemingly simple decision to open the door on a freezing night was much more than an act of compassion. It was the beginning of a new life, a rebirth in which pain and loss were still present, but no longer as chains, but as scars reminding that he had survived, learned, and grown. The story that was once a small spark of humanity became a lighthouse illuminating the transformative power of love, courage, and empathy. Thus, the German Shepherd who was freezing with 2 puppies, and the man's decision to open the door that will surprise you, is not just a story of rescue, but an eternal symbol of redemption and the infinite capacity we all have to change, heal, and start anew.